The morning sun cast long shadows across the landing pad at Luna Station as Commander Jinho Park adjusted his dress uniform one final time. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from excitement mixed with uncertainty. Today would mark the beginning of humanity's greatest adventure, or its greatest mistake. The alien ship Harmony's voice sat on the tarmac like a giant crystal flower, its translucent walls pulsing with soft blue light. Park had seen the videos, but standing before it in person made his breath catch. This was real. After decades of wondering if Earth was alone in the universe, the answer had arrived 3 months ago in the form of a simple message broadcast across all human communication networks. Greetings, young species of the third planet. The Galactic Commerce Coalition welcomes you to join the community of civilized worlds. Now Park found himself leading humanity's first delegation to meet these galactic neighbors. His aide, Lieutenant Deun Kim, approached with a data pad clutched against her chest. Her usually calm demeanor showed cracks of nervousness. "Sir, the final briefing materials from Earth Command," she said, handing him the pad. "They want us to remember that we're representing all of humanity today." Park smiled at her concern. "No pressure at all, right, Lieutenant?" The journey to Nexus Prime took 3 days aboard the alien vessel. Park and his small team of diplomats, scientists, and military observers spent the time studying everything they could about their hosts. The Vorthack crew members were polite but distant, their crystalline bodies refracting light in beautiful patterns as they moved through the ship's corridors. They answered questions with patience, though Park noticed they often exchanged glances he couldn't interpret. When they finally arrived at Nexus Prime, Park's breath stopped entirely. The space station was massive beyond human comprehension, a sprawling city of interconnected structures that stretched for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. Ships of dozens of different designs came and went like insects around a hive, some so alien that Park couldn't tell which end was supposed to be the front. "Welcome to the heart of galactic civilization," said their Vorthack guide, its voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Here, over 2,000 species conduct peaceful trade and diplomacy." The docking bay where their shuttle landed was larger than any building on Earth. As they walked through the corridors, Park marveled at the diversity of life forms around them. Floating gas creatures drifted in transparent spheres. 6-legged beings with fur like silver wire scuttled past in small groups. Something that looked like a walking tree nodded politely as it passed. The council chamber was even more impressive, a vast amphitheater with seating arranged to accommodate dozens of different body types. At the center sat a curved table where the coalition's leaders waited to meet them. Ambassador Vex, 7 of the Zora T, dominated the center position, its insect-like body gleaming under the chamber's lights. Multiple eyes focused on the human delegation as they approached, while mandibles clicked in what Park hoped was a welcoming gesture. "So these are the humans," Vex 7 said, its voice carrying easily across the chamber despite sounding like autumn leaves rustling in the wind. "How remarkable. Bipedal mammals from a single star system. Tell me, Commander Park, how long has your species possessed faster-than-light travel?" "We don't," Park admitted, feeling heat rise in his cheeks. "This is actually our first journey beyond our own solar system." A ripple of what might have been laughter passed through the assembled delegates. Vex 7's mandibles clicked more rapidly. "How wonderfully primitive. No FTL capability, and yet you've managed basic fusion power and kinetic projectile weapons. Like children playing with their first tools." Lieutenant Kim shifted uncomfortably beside Park, but he pressed forward with their prepared presentation. Earth's history, culture, and aspirations were met with polite interest that felt increasingly condescending. When Park described humanity's military conflicts, several delegates made sounds that were clearly amusement. "Wars?" asked a floating ethereal, its voice emanating from speakers built into its containment sphere. "How quaint. Most civilized species abandoned such wasteful behavior millennia ago. Economic competition is so much more efficient." "Indeed," agreed Vex 7. "Violence is the domain of the uncivilized. But do not worry, young humans. Under Coalition guidance, your species will learn proper behavior. We have successfully uplifted dozens of primitive species over the centuries." The offer was generous, at least on the surface. Earth would be granted protected developing world status, allowing human traders and workers throughout Coalition space while receiving basic technologies and educational programs. In return, humanity would accept certain limitations on military development and agree to Coalition oversight of major policy decisions. "Think of it as a mentorship," explained Vex 7. "Your people will serve and support roles throughout the galaxy, learning civilized behavior while contributing their physical capabilities to useful endeavors." Mining, construction, hazardous waste disposal, tasks that more evolved species prefer to avoid. Park noticed how the other protected species delegates sat quietly in designated areas, their posture suggesting submission rather than partnership. The Malari representatives looked almost drugged in their docility, while the Dunlathai workers fidgeted constantly, as if eager to return to their assigned tasks. Something cold settled in Park's stomach, but he maintained his diplomatic smile. Earth needed this opportunity. Humanity had dreamed of joining a galactic community for generations. The Treaty of Terran Integration was signed that afternoon in a ceremony broadcast live to billions of humans watching from Earth. Park's signature committed his species to a path that promised wonders beyond imagination. As the celebration continued around them, Lieutenant Kim leaned close to whisper, "Sir, did you notice how they talked about us? Like we were pets they were adopting." Park nodded slowly, watching Ambassador Vex 7 discuss humanity's potential with other delegates. The aliens spoke about humans the way humans might discuss a particularly promising breed of working animal. "Yes, Lieutenant. I noticed." What none of the coalition representatives realized was that they had just invited Earth's children to learn everything about galactic civilization, its strengths, its weaknesses, and most importantly, its fears. Humanity would prove to be very quick students indeed. The most dangerous predators, after all, were often those that appeared harmless at first glance. Captain Minho Lee floated in the cramped bridge of the patrol vessel Resilience, watching cargo haulers drift past his position near the Arcturus trade station. 23 years had passed since humanity joined the galactic community, and this was what it had led to, babysitting space traffic like a crossing guard. His communication officer, Ensign Taemin Park, looked up from his console with barely hidden frustration. "Sir, another complaint from the Malari transport captain. Says we're conducting unnecessary inspections of their cargo holds." Lee sighed and rubbed his temples. The Malari were one of the coalition's model species, peaceful, obedient, and completely unwilling to question orders from their alien supervisors. They hauled cargo between systems without complaint, never asking what they carried or why certain routes were restricted to coalition vessels only. "Log the complaint, Ensign. And remind the captain that Earth patrol vessels are required to inspect all cargo moving through this sector." It was busy work and everyone knew it. Earth's 12 patrol ships were scattered across coalition space, performing duties that kept them visible but powerless. They checked shipping manifests, mediated minor trade disputes, and occasionally rescued stranded vessels. Hardly the glorious space exploration humanity had dreamed about. Everything changed when the war began. The conflict started in a distant spiral arm where the coalition faced something called the hegemony, another galactic power that had been expanding aggressively for decades. Lee first learned about it when emergency orders arrived from Earth Command, transmitted through secure coalition channels. "All human vessels are hereby conscripted for military service in support of coalition defense operations," the message began. Lee read it 3 times before the words sank in. Within days, the Resilience and her sister ships found themselves attached to the coalition's 3rd Expeditionary Force. The fleet was a collection of outdated vessels crewed by species the coalition considered expendable. Ancient destroyers from races that had fallen behind in technology. Transport ships hastily fitted with weapons. Patrol boats like Lee's own ship, designed for police work rather than combat. The human crews quickly realized they were being used as cannon fodder. "Look at this intelligence briefing," said Lieutenant So-Yun Kim, Lee's tactical officer, as they prepared for their first combat mission. "The hegemony forces have energy shields that can stop anything we're carrying. Our plasma cannons might as well be flashlights." Lee studied the tactical data with growing concern. The enemy ships were faster, better armed, and protected by defensive systems that Coalition Command had labeled currently impenetrable. The battle plan called for expendable forces to distract the enemy while more valuable Coalition vessels attacked from flanking positions. "We're meant to die out there," whispered Ensign Park. "They're sending us in to absorb enemy fire while the real fleet gets into position. The Battle of Kepler Nebula should have been a massacre." 50 expendable vessels, including 6 human patrol ships, faced a hegemony strike force of 20 advanced warships. Coalition Command expected maybe 10% of the expendable force to survive. But something unexpected happened. Captain Lee watched his tactical display as enemy ships closed in, their weapons charging for the kill. Standard Coalition doctrine called for maintaining formation and trading firepower until one side broke. It was civilized warfare, predictable, calculable, and usually decided by whoever had superior technology. Lee threw the manual out the airlock. All ships, this is resilience, he broadcast on the human command frequency. Forget formation flying. Go evasive and target their weapon systems. What followed broke every rule of civilized space combat. Human ships scattered like startled birds, using the nebulous gas clouds for cover while launching hit-and-run attacks that confused enemy targeting systems. When the Defiant lost her main engines, Captain Eugene Hahn used her maneuvering thrusters to ram an enemy destroyer, evacuating her crew in escape pods that continued attacking with handheld weapons. The hegemony forces found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to behave predictably. Human ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting with jury-rigged repairs and backup systems. Crews that should have surrendered when their shields failed instead launched boarding parties armed with tools and improvised weapons. By the end of the battle, 12 hegemony vessels were destroyed or disabled. The human ships had suffered heavy casualties, but they had achieved something coalition military computers classified as impossible: tactical victory against a technologically superior enemy. The reports that reached coalition high command were dismissed as errors in the combat data. Primitive humans with outdated ships could not have defeated advanced hegemony forces. There had to be some other explanation. But word spread through the expendable fleets. Humans fought differently. They adapted, improvised, and refused to accept defeat even when logic demanded surrender. Other species began requesting human advisors for their combat operations. Back on Earth, Dr. Su Jinyang worked in a hidden laboratory beneath the Gobi Desert, studying salvaged alien technology that human crews smuggled back from combat zones. Each battle provided new samples: enemy weapons, shield generators, computer systems that had been damaged enough to bypass their security locks. What she discovered changed everything humanity thought they knew about their galactic neighbors. The Coalition's peace wasn't built on enlightened cooperation. It was enforced by fear. The enforcement caste genetically modified soldiers bred specifically for violence, crushed any species that showed signs of independence. Entire worlds had been sterilized for refusing economic agreements that essentially amounted to slavery. The final revelation came when footage reached Earth showing the fate of the Zephyrians. The crystalline beings had petitioned for independence from Coalition mining operations that were poisoning their silicon-based biology. The Coalition's response was swift and merciless: orbital bombardment that turned their homeworld into molten glass. Admiral Haiwan Park, daughter of the original First Contact team leader, watched the horrific images in her office at Earth Command. Billions of innocent beings reduced to slag because they had dared to ask for basic rights. "We've been naive," she told the emergency session of Earth's Defense Council that night. "This isn't civilization. It's slavery with better marketing." In secret facilities across human space, engineers and scientists began working with new purpose. Every piece of salvaged alien technology was reverse-engineered, improved, and integrated into hybrid designs that combined human ingenuity with galactic science. The results were crude but effective. Human weapons that fired projectiles at impossible velocities. Shield systems that used rotating frequencies to confuse enemy targeting. Ships designed with so many redundant systems that they could keep fighting even after taking damage that should have destroyed them. Humanity had spent centuries perfecting the art of warfare on their homeworld. Now they were about to remind the galaxy why apex predators had evolved in the first place. Admiral Haiwan Park stood in the transport shuttle, watching Nexus Prime grow larger through the viewport. The massive space station looked the same as it had 24 years ago when her father first visited, but everything felt different now. The weight of what she carried, evidence of the Zephyrian massacre, made her stomach twist with anger and fear. Her aide, Commander Junho Lee, sat beside her reviewing the presentation files one last time. His hands shook slightly as he scrolled through the images. Even after seeing them dozens of times, the pictures of molten crystal beings still made him feel sick. "Admiral, are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Once we show these images to the Assembly, there's no going back. The Coalition will never forgive us for challenging them publicly." Park straightened her dress uniform and checked her appearance in the shuttle's small mirror. She looked calm and professional, but inside her heart was racing. No member species had ever formally protested a Coalition decision. In 10,000 years of galactic history, every species had learned to stay quiet and obey orders. "The Zephyrians died asking for the right to breathe clean air on their own world," she said softly. "If we stay silent now, we're just as guilty as their killers." The assembly chamber was packed with delegates from across the galaxy. Park recognized many of the species from her father's old reports: the floating ethereals in their containment spheres, the tree-like Verdani swaying gently in the artificial breeze, the metallic constructors clicking and whirring as they communicated through electronic pulses. At the center table sat the Coalition Council, dominated as always by Ambassador Vex, 7 of the Zorati. The insect-like being's multiple eyes tracked Park's movement as she approached the speaking platform, mandibles clicking in what might have been curiosity or irritation. "Honored delegates," Park began, her voice amplified by the chamber's sound system. "I come before you today representing the human species with a matter of grave concern." Murmurs rippled through the assembled aliens. Most had probably never heard a member species request time to address the full assembly. Such things simply weren't done. 3 weeks ago, the world of Zephyr was subjected to orbital bombardment by Coalition enforcement forces. The official report states this action was necessary to maintain galactic stability. I am here to present evidence that this was genocide of an innocent species. The chamber erupted. Delegates rose from their seats, making sounds of shock, anger, and disbelief. Ambassador Vex 7's mandibles clacked rapidly as it called for order. "The human delegate exceeds her authority," Vex 7 declared. "Protected species do not question council decisions. Such behavior is unprecedented and inappropriate." Park activated her presentation system, and the chamber's main screens filled with images that made several delegates gasp audibly. Crystalline cities melting under nuclear fire. Zephyrian children trying to flee as their silicon-based bodies began to soften and run like liquid glass. Entire continents turned to slag in a matter of hours. These images were taken by Coalition survey teams after the bombardment, Park continued, her voice steady despite the horror she was showing. The Zephyrians committed no crime except requesting cleaner mining operations that wouldn't poison their atmosphere. They were peaceful beings who had served the Coalition faithfully for over 2 centuries. A ethereal delegate's voice echoed from its speaker system. "Surely the human shows outdated footage from some historical conflict. The Coalition does not engage in such primitive violence." "The timestamp codes verify these images are from last month," Park replied. "The enforcement cast's own records confirm the operation. 12 billion sentient beings were murdered because they asked for the right to survive on their own world." The chamber fell silent except for the background hum of life support systems. Several delegates stared at the screens in shock, while others looked away from the terrible images. Ambassador Vex 7 rose to its full height, mandibles spread in what Park's father had once described as a threat display. The human delegate spreads dangerous misinformation. The Zephyrian situation was resolved through necessary enforcement action to maintain galactic order. Protected species are not qualified to judge such complex matters. "Genocide is not complex," Park shot back, abandoning diplomatic protocol. "Murder is murder regardless of who orders it or what justification they use." The assembly erupted again, but this time Park could hear a different quality to the voices. Some delegates sounded frightened, as if they were seeing their own potential fate in the melted Zephyrian cities. Others seemed angry that a lesser species dared challenge the natural order. Park pressed on, knowing she might never get another chance. "Humanity formally protests the genocide of the Zephyrian people. We demand a full investigation and the prosecution of those responsible. We call upon all member species to examine whether this is the civilization they chose to join." Vex 7's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "The Terrahumans forget their place in the natural order. Perhaps they require educational measures to remind them of proper gratitude for Coalition generosity." The threat was clear. Several delegates from other protected species looked terrified, probably remembering their own world's histories and wondering if they would be next. "Humanity hears your threat," Park said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. "We reject it completely. We will not be silenced by fear, and we will not participate in a system built on the bones of murdered innocents." She gathered her materials and walked toward the exit, knowing that every eye in the chamber was following her. At the doorway she turned back to face the assembly one final time. "The Zephyrians trusted you to protect them. Instead, you destroyed them for asking basic questions about their own survival. History will remember which species stood against evil and which ones collaborated with it." The shuttle ride back to the human delegation's quarters was silent. Commander Lee finally spoke as they approached the docking bay. "Admiral, what happens now?" Park looked out at the vast expanse of Nexus Prime, thinking about all the species living there who believe themselves safe under Coalition protection. "Now we find out if humanity has the courage to stand up to bullies, even when those bullies have bigger guns." Within hours, the Coalition's response arrived through official diplomatic channels. The message was brief and brutal. Humanity had 72 hours to surrender all military assets, exile their leadership, and accept permanent observer status with no voting rights or protective guarantees. The alternative was clearly stated: Earth would face the same enforcement action that had ended the Zephyrian species. Park read the ultimatum aboard the transport carrying the human delegation home. Around her, diplomats and military officers discussed options in hushed voices, but she already knew what Earth's answer would be. Humanity had spent centuries learning to stand up to bullies. The Coalition was about to discover that some lessons, once learned, are never forgotten. Admiral Siwoo Lee stood on the bridge of the human flagship Iron Wolf, watching his tactical display as 60 Coalition warships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Proxima Centauri system. The enemy fleet was beautiful in its deadly elegance, sleek vessels with flowing curves and perfect symmetry, their hulls gleaming like polished jewels in the starlight. His own fleet looked like a collection of industrial accidents by comparison. 12 human warships hung in space around the planet, their hulls bristling with weapons bolted on wherever they could fit. Extra armor plates were welded over critical systems, creating a patchwork appearance that would have embarrassed any Coalition shipwright. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Coalition fleet," reported his communications officer, Lieutenant Minji Park. "They're demanding our immediate surrender." Lee smiled grimly. "Put them through." The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a Coalition dreadnought. At its center stood Fleet Admiral Kethvar of the hegemony species, its 6 arms moving in complex patterns as it gestured at subordinates. The alien's translator made its voice sound cold and mechanical. "Human vessels, you are ordered to power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in the complete destruction of your primitive fleet." "This is Admiral Lee of the Terran Defense Force," he replied calmly. "We respectfully decline your invitation to surrender. If you want our ships, you're welcome to come and take them." Kethvar's arms twitched in what Lee recognized as extreme irritation. "Your 12 craft against our 60? This is suicide, not warfare. Stand down immediately and we may allow some of your crews to survive." "Negative, Coalition fleet. Proxima Centauri is human space now. You're the ones who should consider surrendering." The transmission cut off abruptly. Lee turned to his tactical officer, Commander Tae-ho Kim, who was studying the enemy formation with professional interest. "Analysis, Commander?" "Standard Coalition battle doctrine, sir. They'll advance in formation using their superior firepower to destroy us at long range. Textbook space combat: safe, predictable, and boring." Lee nodded. Coalition military doctrine was based on thousands of years of civilized warfare between species that followed the same basic rules. Stand in formation, trade shots until one side's shields failed, then accept surrender from the losing fleet. It was efficient and minimized casualties among valuable personnel. Humans had never read the textbook. "All ships, this is Iron Wolf," Lee broadcast on the fleet command frequency. "Execute battle plan chaos. Rules of engagement are simple: anything that shoots at you dies. No formations, no fancy maneuvers, just kill them all." What followed broke every rule of civilized space combat that had existed for millennia. The human fleet scattered like a flock of startled birds, each ship heading in a different direction at maximum acceleration. Coalition targeting computers, designed to track predictable formation flying, struggled to maintain locks on vessels that seemed to move randomly through space. Captain Eugene Han commanded the destroyer Vengeance, one of the smaller human vessels. Her ship was ugly even by human standards, a collection of armor plates, weapon mounts, and engine exhausts that looked like it had been assembled by blind mechanics. But hidden beneath the crude exterior was something the Coalition had never encountered before. "Target the lead dreadnought," she ordered her weapons officer. "Full power to the kinetic accelerator." The weapon had been built in Earth's secret shipyards using reverse-engineered alien technology combined with human innovation. Instead of firing energy beams like civilized weapons, it launched tungsten rods at nearly the speed of light. Coalition shields, designed to deflect or absorb energy attacks, had no defense against solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. The tungsten rod punched through the dreadnought's shields like they weren't there, tore through 30 meters of armor, and detonated the ship's main reactor. The massive vessel simply vanished in a ball of nuclear fire. "Impossible," whispered Admiral Kethvar, staring at the empty space where his flagship had been moments before. "How did they penetrate our shields?" The answer came in the form of more tungsten rods, followed by missiles that maneuvered like living creatures and energy weapons that seemed to ignore basic physics. Human engineers had taken Coalition technology and twisted it in ways that violated every principle of proper design. The weapons were crude, inefficient, and absolutely devastating. The Iron Wolf lost her main engines to a lucky hit from a Coalition destroyer, but Admiral Lee simply shrugged and ordered his crew to keep fighting. The ship's backup thrusters weren't designed for combat maneuvering, but they worked well enough to keep the vessel moving while her weapons continued firing. "Sir, we're being boarded," reported his security chief, Major So-Young Cho. "Coalition Marines are cutting through the hull near engineering." "Show them some human hospitality," Lee replied, never taking his eyes off the tactical display. What the Coalition Marines found waiting for them was unlike anything in their combat training. Human crew members who should have been cowering behind barricades instead charged at them with knives, wrenches, and improvised weapons. When their personal shields failed, the humans kept fighting with their bare hands. The boarding action turned into a nightmare for the Coalition forces. They were trained to fight civilized enemies who would surrender when faced with superior firepower. Humans just got angry and fought harder. Captain Dong-hyun Park commanded the cruiser Defiant when enemy fire disabled her weapons and navigation systems. Any sane captain would have ordered evacuation, but Park had a different idea. "All hands prepare for ramming speed," he announced over the ship's intercom. "We're going to take that dreadnought with us." The Defiant struck the Coalition vessel amidships at nearly 10% of light speed. Both ships were destroyed instantly, but not before Park's crew had evacuated and armed shuttles that continued attacking nearby enemy vessels. The battle lasted 6 hours and ended with the complete destruction or capture of the Coalition fleet. Human losses were heavy, 4 ships destroyed and 3 others badly damaged, but they had achieved something that military computers classified as impossible. When Coalition reinforcements arrived the next day, they found their comrades survivors floating in escape pods, many of them suffering from what human doctors would have called shell shock. The rescued aliens spoke in whispers about boarding parties that fought like wild animals and weapons that defied the laws of physics. Admiral Lee's message to the fleeing reinforcement fleet was broadcast across human space and intercepted by intelligence services throughout the galaxy. "Tell your masters that humanity is done playing by their rules. We didn't start this war, but we're going to finish it. Every world you've oppressed, every species you've enslaved, every innocent being you've murdered, we remember them all. Come back when you're ready to surrender." Within months, human fleets began appearing in systems across Coalition space. Each battle taught them new lessons about alien technology and tactics. Each victory made them more dangerous. Species that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years discovered that their greatest advantage, superior technology, meant nothing against an enemy that refused to fight fair. The galaxy was learning a lesson that Earth's predators had taught for millions of years. Evolution favors not the strongest or the smartest, but the most adaptable. And humanity had spent centuries adapting to the art of war. General So-Young Park watched through the armored viewport of her command ship as Nexus Prime burned in the distance. The massive space station that had once been the center of galactic civilization now looked like a dying star, with fires consuming entire sections and debris spinning away into the void. Her flagship, the dreadnought Liberation, hung in space surrounded by the largest human fleet ever assembled. 300 warships from dozens of different worlds, all united under the banner of the Human Alliance. Ships that had once been enemies now fought side by side, former Coalition vessels captured and converted, alien designs improved with human modifications, and pure human warships that looked like instruments of war rather than works of art. "General, the final assault force is ready," reported her aide, Commander Ji-hoon Lee. His voice was steady, but she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. 5 years of constant warfare had aged all of them beyond their years. Park nodded, still watching the burning station. She remembered visiting Nexus Prime as a young officer, back when humans still believed in the Coalition's promises of peace and cooperation. That naive girl felt like a different person entirely. "Send the signal," she ordered. "All forces, commence final assault." The siege of Nexus Prime had lasted 3 days, but those 3 days had seen fighting unlike anything in galactic history. The Coalition's last stronghold was defended by the enforcement caste genetically modified soldiers bred specifically for violence and trained from birth to follow orders without question. But even perfect soldiers needed food, ammunition, and hope. The human blockade had cut off all supplies to the station, while constant bombardment had destroyed most of its defensive systems. More importantly, word had spread throughout the station about what was happening in the galaxy outside. Species that had been slaves for centuries were throwing off their chains. The Malari, once so docile they seemed drugged, had risen in rebellion across their homeworld. The Dunlathai workers had seized Coalition mining facilities and declared independence. Even the ethereal gas beings had joined the fight, using their unique abilities to infiltrate Coalition computer systems. The final assault began with boarding parties launched from converted cargo ships. Human Marines led mixed teams of liberated aliens through the station's corridors, fighting room by room against defenders who knew they had nowhere to retreat. Captain Minjun Kim commanded one such boarding party, his team a mixture of humans and former coalition slaves working together. They moved through the station's residential sectors, where civilian aliens cowered in their quarters while the sounds of battle echoed through the metal walls. "Remember," Kim broadcast to his team, "we're here to liberate, not conquer. Any civilian who surrenders is under our protection." It was a message that would have been impossible during the early days of the war, when human crews fought with such fury that few enemies survived to surrender. But 5 years of fighting had taught humanity important lessons about victory and justice. The breakthrough came when human engineers managed to hack into the station's central computer system. Instead of simply shutting down life support or opening airlocks to space, they did something that shocked even their own commanders. They broadcast footage of liberated worlds throughout the station. Enforcement caste soldiers watched in disbelief as their screens showed former slave species celebrating freedom. Coalition officials saw their own species declaring neutrality or joining the human cause. Most importantly, everyone saw what had happened to worlds that had resisted human liberation. They were left alone, their governments intact, their people free to choose their own path. "We don't conquer," Park's voice echoed through every speaker on the station. "We liberate. Any being who lays down their weapons and renounces oppression will be treated with dignity and respect. But those who continue to support slavery and genocide will face human justice." The psychological effect was devastating. Enforcement soldiers, raised from birth to believe in the coalition's righteousness, began to question everything they had been taught. When they saw footage of Zephyrian refugees, survivors who had escaped the genocide thanks to human rescue missions, many simply dropped their weapons and surrendered. The Coalition Council made its last stand in the assembly chamber where Admiral Haiwon Park had first challenged their authority years earlier. Ambassador Vex 7 and its fellow councilors barricaded themselves behind energy shields, surrounded by their most loyal enforcement guards. The end came quickly. Human assault teams, supported by former coalition species seeking revenge for centuries of oppression, overwhelmed the defenses in minutes. Most of the council members were captured alive, though several chose to activate suicide devices rather than face trial for their crimes. When the fighting finally ended, Park found herself standing in the same assembly chamber where her mother had once demanded justice for the Zephyrians. The Great Hall was damaged from battle, its elegant architecture scarred by weapons fire and explosion marks. But it was quiet at last. President Min Suk-young arrived aboard the diplomatic vessel New Dawn, the same ship that had carried the first human delegation to Nexus Prime decades earlier. He walked through the ruined station accompanied by representatives from dozens of liberated worlds, each species finally free to speak their own truth. "The Age of Empires is over," Yang declared to the assembled delegates in the damaged assembly chamber. "We offer a new kind of galactic community, one based on mutual respect and the fundamental right of all beings to determine their own destiny." The Terran Protectorate was officially established that day, but it was unlike any galactic government in history. Instead of ruling from a central capital, it was a loose confederation of independent worlds united by common principles. Species were judged not by their age or technology level, but by their commitment to freedom and justice. The former coalition's enforcer species faced trials for their crimes, but even they were offered a path to redemption. Those who genuinely repented and worked to repair the damage they had caused were given new chances. Those who refused were exiled to remote worlds where they could no longer harm others. Years later, as Park stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt Nexus Prime, now renamed Freedom Station, she watched ships from hundreds of worlds come and go in peaceful trade. Her granddaughter, Lieutenant Cha Park, served aboard one of the new patrol vessels that protected the station. The galaxy had learned what happened when sleeping predators were awakened by injustice. But more importantly, it had learned that humans were not conquerors seeking empire, they were liberators who refused to accept a universe built on fear and oppression. Earth's children had inherited the galaxy not through conquest, but through the simple refusal to bow to evil. And they intended to ensure that future generations would never again face the choice between slavery and extinction. Freedom, once awakened, could never be put back to sleep.